A ruthless mafia king who never saves anyone, stopped his car for one girl in the rain. But when she whispered his name, and revealed a truth buried in a war he thought was over, he realized, protecting her wouldn't just risk his empire, it would destroy everything he built. The city did not sleep that night. Rain poured relentlessly over the empty streets of Chicago, turning the asphalt into a mirror of broken light and blurred reflections. Neon signs flickered weakly through the storm, their glow struggling against the heavy darkness pressing down from the sky. The air felt thick, almost suffocating, as if the city itself was holding its breath, waiting for something it could not stop. Danger lived in nights like this. And everyone who understood the city knew one thing: when the rain got this heavy, the monsters moved easier. A line of black SUVs cut through the storm with controlled precision, their engines low and steady, tires slicing through water without hesitation. The convoy did not rush. It did not need to. The road belonged to it. The silence around them was not empty, it was fear spreading quietly ahead of their arrival. Inside the lead vehicle sat Adrian Voss, the king of an empire built on silence, loyalty, and absolute control. He didn't look at the city as they passed through it. He didn't need to. Every street, every shadow, every whispered deal that shaped the underground, he owned it in ways no law could ever touch. His presence alone shifted the balance of power in any room, any street, any life that crossed his path. Tonight he was quiet, not relaxed, never that, just still. His gaze rested forward, unreadable, as rain streaked across the darkened glass beside him. The storm outside matched something beneath the surface, something tightly contained, something that did not allow itself to surface easily. "Route is clear," one of the men in the front seat said, his voice low, controlled. Adrian gave no response. He didn't confirm. He didn't question. Because in his world, silence was confirmation. The convoy moved deeper into the empty district, far from the crowded city center, where buildings stood tall but lifeless, their windows dark, their doors locked. No witnesses. No distractions. Just the sound of rain hitting concrete and the quiet hum of controlled movement. Then, the driver slowed. Not suddenly. Not panicked. But enough. A shift. Subtle. Wrong. Adrian's eyes lifted slightly. "What is it?" the driver asked under his breath. No one answered immediately, because they all saw it at the same time. A figure. In the middle of the road. At first it looked like nothing more than a shadow blurred by rain. Too small. Too still. Too exposed to belong there. The headlights cut through the storm, illuminating her slowly, revealing more with every inch the vehicle moved forward. A girl. Standing. Barely. Then collapsing. Right in front of the car. The brakes engaged instantly, the vehicle stopping just short of impact. The rest of the convoy halted behind them with precise control, doors already opening before the engine fully settled. Men stepped out into the rain. Fast. Alert. Hands ready. Eyes scanning every angle. This was not random. Nothing in Adrian Voss's world was ever random. "Clear the perimeter," one of the guards ordered sharply, his voice cutting through the storm. Another moved toward the girl but stopped short, hesitation flickering for just a second. Not fear of her, but fear of what she might represent. Because traps didn't always look dangerous. Sometimes they looked helpless. Adrian opened his door. Slowly. Deliberately. The rain hit him instantly, soaking into the sharp lines of his dark coat, but he didn't react. He stepped out with the same controlled presence he carried everywhere, his shoes hitting the wet asphalt with quiet authority. The guards shifted subtly, creating space. Not because they were told. Because they understood. He walked toward her. Each step measured. Unhurried. Power did not rush. It arrived. The girl lay on the ground, barely conscious, her breath uneven, her body trembling slightly from cold or exhaustion, or something worse. Rain soaked through her clothes, her hair clinging to her face, hiding most of her expression. But not all of it. Adrian stopped just inches away. And for the first time that night, something shifted. Not around him. Inside him. His heart pounding once. Harder than it should have. Because there was something wrong. Not with the situation. With her. He crouched slightly, his gaze narrowing as he studied her face more closely. Pale. Fragile. But not empty. There was something behind her closed eyes. Something that did not belong to someone this small. This broken. This exposed. "Sir," one of the guards said quietly, a warning in his tone. "This could be." Adrian raised a hand. Silence. Total. Absolute. He didn't take his eyes off her. Because now he could see it. On her wrist. partially hidden beneath soaked fabric. A mark. Faint. But unmistakable. Adrian's breath stilled. Because that symbol belonged to a war he had already ended. Or at least, he thought he had. Before she collapsed under Adrian Voss's headlights, before the rain swallowed her final step, Ilara Quinn had already survived a night that should have ended her. The city had chased her. Not loudly. Not openly. But relentlessly. She had been running for hours, her shoes soaked, her breath uneven, her body pushing beyond limits it should not have crossed. Every turn she took, every street she chose, every shadow she slipped through, it wasn't random. It was calculated. Survival was not instinct for her anymore. It was learned. It was controlled. Because Ilara was not a victim. She had never been one. The first time they came for her, she understood something immediately. Fear was real, but panic was death. So she adapted. She listened. She memorized patterns. The way engines slowed before stopping. The way footsteps changed when they weren't just passing by. The way silence stretched too long before something broke it. Tonight, that silence had followed her. A black sedan 2 blocks behind. A figure standing too still beneath a streetlight. A reflection in a shattered window that moved when she didn't. Danger didn't shout. It watched. Ilara kept moving. Her body was weakening, every step heavier than the last, but her mind refused to stop. She cut through alleys, crossed empty intersections, slipped between buildings where the rain hit harder, colder. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from exhaustion pressing deeper into her muscles. Still she didn't stop. Because stopping meant they would find her. And if they found her, it wouldn't end quietly. Her fingers tightened around the small object hidden beneath her sleeve. She didn't look at it. She didn't need to. She knew it was still there. Still intact. Still the reason she was being hunted through a city that suddenly felt too small to hide in. Something valuable. Or something dangerous. Maybe both. Her breath hitched as she turned another corner, her pace slowing despite her will. The rain blurred her vision now, the world around her shifting into streaks of light and shadow. Her body was reaching its limit, and no amount of control could change that. Not anymore. But even then, she didn't break. Her eyes lifted slightly, scanning ahead, searching for one last path, one last opening, one last chance to stay ahead of whatever was closing in behind her. And then she saw it. The convoy. Black vehicles cutting through the storm like something inevitable. Not chaotic. Not random. Controlled. Powerful. The kind of presence that didn't belong to the same world as the men chasing her. Ilara slowed. Just for a second. Her mind moved quickly, faster than her failing body. Danger was everywhere. But not all danger was the same. Some destroyed you. Others protected you. Her heart pounded harder now, not from fear, but from decision. Because she recognized something in those vehicles. Not safety. Never that. But control. And control meant structure. And structure meant rules. And rules meant a chance. Behind her, a shadow shifted again, closer now. Too close. Ilara didn't look back this time. She didn't hesitate. She stepped forward. Directly into the path of the convoy. Her legs gave out just as the headlights reached her, her body collapsing into the rain-soaked road. Not because she was weak. Not because she was broken. Because she had chosen her last move. Her breath shallow now, barely steady, her vision fading in and out as the sound of the vehicles stopping echoed faintly around her. Voices. Movement. Control returning to the chaos she had just escaped. But her mind. Still fighting. Still holding on. Still refusing to let go. Because she knew one thing. If she survived this moment, everything would change. Her fingers loosened slightly against her sleeve, the hidden object pressing faintly against her skin. Still there. Still safe. For now. Footsteps approached. Slow. Deliberate. Different from the others. She felt it before she saw him. Power. Close. Not loud. Not rushed. But undeniable. Her breath faltered as the presence stopped near her, the rain hitting harder against the silence that followed. Ilara forced her eyes open just enough to see a blurred outline standing over her. Tall. Still. Watching. Not like a hunter. Like something deciding. Her lips parted slightly, her voice barely a whisper, fragile but carrying something far heavier than her condition suggested. One name. Soft. Uncertain. But unmistakable. Adrian? The sound barely existed. But it was enough. Because Adrian Voss had never told anyone his name in a place like this. And yet, she knew it. Adrian Voss did not become powerful overnight. He became inevitable. In a city where alliances shifted like shadows and loyalty was often nothing more than a temporary illusion, Adrian built something no one else could control. An empire that did not depend on noise, reputation, or chaos, but on precision, on structure, on decisions made long before others even realized there was a game being played. The ports moved because he allowed them to. Political doors opened because his influence reached behind them. The underground networks that most men feared answered to him in silence. He did not need to prove his power. It was already understood. That was what made him king. Not titles. Not declarations. Control. Absolute and unquestioned. Men who worked for him did not ask why. They did not hesitate. They followed because they knew the alternative was not failure, it was disappearance. Not loud. Not public. Just gone. And that understanding built a loyalty stronger than fear alone. Adrian didn't save people. He assessed them. Value or threat. Use or eliminate. There was no space in his empire for uncertainty. That was the rule. One he had never broken. Until now. Rain continued to fall steadily around him, soaking into his coat as he stood over the girl lying on the asphalt. His men waited for direction, their eyes shifting between him and the unconscious figure at his feet. The situation was wrong on every level. Too exposed. Too convenient. Too perfectly placed. A trap. It had to be. And yet, he hadn't moved. Hadn't stepped back. Hadn't ordered her removed from his path like anything else that disrupted his control. Instead he remained there still watching her. Analyzing. Because something didn't align. Not just the mark on her wrist. Not just the fact that she had stepped into his convoy with intention. It was the name. His name. Spoken like she knew it. Not heard it. Not guessed it. Known it. Adrian's jaw tightened slightly, the smallest shift in expression that most would never notice. But his men did. Because they had spent years learning the difference between silence and tension. And this was tension. Sir, one of them said carefully, stepping closer but not too close. We should move. This is not secure. Adrian didn't respond immediately. His gaze lowered again to the girl. Alara Quinn. The name meant nothing. But she did. There was something in her presence that disrupted logic. Not loudly. Not aggressively. But persistently. Like a question he could not immediately answer, and that alone made her dangerous. He crouched slightly, his hand hovering near her wrist, just enough to confirm what he had already seen. The mark. Faint. Precise. A symbol tied to a war he had ended years ago. A war that had required every ounce of his control to survive. A war that had erased entire networks, entire bloodlines, until nothing remained that could threaten his empire again. Or so he believed. His breath slowed. Measured. Controlled. But beneath it, something shifted. Because if that mark still existed, then the war had never truly ended. And if she carried it, then she was not random. She was connected. To something buried. To something dangerous. To something that had just stepped back into his world. Adrian straightened slowly, rain sliding down his face as his expression returned to its usual unreadable state. The moment of hesitation disappeared so quickly it was almost as if it had never existed. Almost. His men watched him closely now. Waiting. Because they all knew the rule. Nothing unpredictable entered his world and stayed. Nothing. Adrian's gaze moved once more over the girl, taking in every detail. The exhaustion. The calculated positioning. The fact that she had chosen his convoy, not any other path. That wasn't coincidence. That was intent. Which meant she had already made her move. And now it was his turn. Leave her, one of the guards said quietly, testing the line, reminding him without directly challenging him. We don't take unknown risks. Silence followed. Heavy. Decisive. Because Adrian Voss did not reconsider. He decided. And once that decision was made, it became reality. His voice came low. Controlled. Final. Bring her. The words landed harder than any command. Because they broke the rule. His rule. The one that built his empire. The one that defined his power. And in that moment, every man around him understood something had changed. Not outside. Inside. Because the king who owned the city had just chosen uncertainty over control. And that choice would start something he could not stop. The convoy moved again. Not slower. Not faster. Controlled. But something had shifted. Inside the vehicle, Ilara lay across the leather seat, her breath shallow but steady now, her presence no longer just an interruption, but a question that refused to settle. Adrian sat opposite her, silent, watching, his empire moving around him like it always did. structured, loyal, predictable. Except tonight. Nothing felt predictable. Then it happened. A flicker. Not outside. Inside the system. The lead driver's voice came through the comm, lower than before, tighter. We have movement on the outer grid. Adrian didn't react immediately. Define movement, he said. Pause. Too long. Then. Multiple vehicles. No IDs. They're not avoiding us. Silence filled the car. Heavy. Because in Adrian Voss's world, everyone avoided him. That was the rule. Until someone decided to break it. The convoy adjusted formation instantly, tightening around the central vehicle. Engines shifted, spacing changed, angles recalculated. Loyalty in motion. Control adapting. But the rain. It made everything harder to see. And easier to hide. Adrian's gaze moved briefly to Alara. Still. Quiet. But her fingers. They moved slightly. Not randomly. Reacting. Her breath changed. Faster now. Not fear. Recognition. They found me, she whispered, barely audible. Adrian's eyes sharpened. How? He asked. But she didn't answer. Because she didn't need to. The first impact came as a sudden jolt beneath the convoy, not explosive, not chaotic, but calculated. A disruption. The lead vehicle swerved slightly before regaining control, but the formation had already been forced open. War had arrived. Not loudly, but precisely. Hold formation, Adrian ordered, his voice calm, cutting through the rising tension like it always did. But something was wrong. This wasn't random aggression. This was targeted, focused, deliberate. Alara's eyes opened slightly now, unfocused but aware. Her gaze moved toward the window, tracking something invisible to everyone else. They're not aiming at the convoy, she said, her voice weak but certain. Adrian looked at her. What do you mean? Her breath hitched once, then steadied again. They're adjusting, moving closer. They know where I am. Heart pounding. Not from fear. From realization. Adrian's gaze darkened. That wasn't possible. Unless. Betrayal. The word didn't need to be spoken. It existed in the silence. Inside the system. Inside his empire. Because no one outside could track him this precisely. No one. The second disruption came from the side. Another calculated movement, forcing one of the escort vehicles to shift position. Not to destroy. To isolate. To create space. For access. They're trying to break the center, one of his men said sharply. Adrian didn't respond. Because he already knew. This wasn't about stopping him. This was about reaching her. Alara shifted slightly, forcing herself upright despite the weakness in her body. Her movements were slow, controlled, deliberate. Not panic. Strategy. She wasn't reacting. She was thinking. They're going to push from the left, she whispered, her eyes fixed on something beyond the glass. Then cut behind, they want the blind spot. Adrian watched her closely now. Because she wasn't guessing. She was predicting. And she was right. The formation adjusted again, his men moving instantly on instinct and command, closing the gap before it could be exploited. The attack shifted again in response. Adaptive. Intelligent. Close. Too close. Adrian reached forward, his hand closing firmly around her arm, pulling her slightly toward him, not harshly but with unmistakable intent. Protect. The shift was instinctive. Immediate. Unquestioned. And it changed everything. Because Adrian Voss did not protect unknown variables. He removed them. But not her. Not this time. Alara didn't resist. Her eyes met his, something unspoken passing between them. Not trust. Not yet. But alignment. She understood. And so did he. This wasn't just an attack. This was a message. You brought something into my world, Adrian said quietly, his voice dropping into a controlled whisper. Something they're willing to risk everything for. Alara's expression didn't change. I didn't bring it, she replied softly. Pause. A truth forming. They lost it, she added. The convoy stabilized again, but the pressure didn't ease. The movement outside continued, calculated, patient, waiting for another opening. Waiting for one mistake. Adrian leaned back slightly, his mind already moving ahead, recalculating, restructuring, isolating variables. But one fact refused to shift. This attack. It was too precise. Too informed. Too aligned with his internal systems. His gaze hardened. Because that meant one thing. They're not outsiders, he said quietly. Alara watched him. And in that moment, he understood something he had not allowed himself to consider before. This wasn't an external war. This was internal. And as the convoy pushed forward through the storm, Adrian Voss reached one impossible conclusion. The people hunting her were from his own empire. The gates of Adrian Voss's estate did not open for uncertainty. They opened for control. Massive steel barriers slid apart in silence as the convoy entered, sealing the outside world away with a finality that few ever experience from the inside. The estate stood isolated on the edge of the city, surrounded by layers of security that did not rely on visibility, but on precision. Every movement monitored. Every entry calculated. Every presence accounted for. Nothing entered without purpose. Except her. Ilara was carried inside without resistance, her body still weak but her awareness returning slowly with every passing moment. The storm outside faded behind reinforced walls, replaced by something unfamiliar. Stillness. Not the kind filled with danger, but something quieter, safer. For the first time in hours, her breath slowed, not because she had escaped everything, but because she had stepped into a place where chaos did not exist without permission. And in this place, Adrian Voss decided what stayed. She was placed in a private room deep within the estate, far from windows, far from exposure, where the lighting was soft and controlled, and the silence did not feel threatening. It felt contained. Ilara sat upright now, her back resting lightly against the headboard, her fingers still curled faintly as if holding onto something unseen. Her eyes moved slowly across the room, taking in every detail. Not as someone overwhelmed. As someone analyzing. She was not afraid. Not the way she should have been. Because fear had already passed through her long ago and found nothing left to take. The door opened quietly. Adrian stepped inside. Alone. No guards. No witnesses. That alone shifted the air. He didn't speak immediately. He didn't move closer. He simply stood there, watching her with the same controlled intensity he carried everywhere. But here, in the quiet of his own space, that control felt different. Less distant. More focused. "You're not asking where you are," he said finally, his voice low, measured. Ilara looked at him. "I know where I am," she replied softly. Pause. Not tension. Recognition. Adrian stepped closer, closing the distance between them with slow, deliberate movement. Not threatening. Not rushed. But intentional. Close. Too close for someone who trusted no one. And yet. He stopped only when he could see her clearly, when there was no distance left for misinterpretation. "You shouldn't feel safe here," he said quietly. Ilara's gaze didn't waver. "I don't," she answered. Another pause. A shift. "But I'm not running anymore." The words settled between them, heavier than anything spoken before. Because running had defined her. And stopping was a choice. Adrian studied her more closely now, noticing what others might miss. The steadiness in her breath. The absence of panic. The way she held herself, not like someone fragile, but like someone who had learned exactly how much space she needed to survive. There was strength there. Not loud. Not obvious. But undeniable. "You walked into my path," he said. "That wasn't survival. That was intent." Ilara's fingers tightened slightly against the fabric beneath her hand. Yes. No hesitation. No deflection. Truth. Adrian's expression remained unreadable, but something beneath it shifted again. Not weakness. Not emotion. Recognition. Because she wasn't denying it. She wasn't hiding. She was meeting him directly. And that changed the equation. "Why?" he asked. Ilara didn't answer immediately. Instead, she watched him, her gaze moving over his face as if confirming something she had already suspected. As if she had been looking for him. Not avoiding him. The realization settled slowly. Dangerously. Adrian stepped even closer now, his presence filling the space between them completely. His voice lowered, almost a whisper. "You don't come to me unless you understand what that means," he said. "Nothing in this place leaves without my decision." The word hung there. Unspoken. But clear. Mine. Not possession. Not yet. But something forming. Something shifting. Ilara didn't step back. Didn't look away. Instead, she leaned slightly forward, her breath steady, her voice quiet but certain. "I know," she said. Silence followed. Heavy. Decisive. Because this was no longer about chance. Or coincidence. Or survival. This was something else entirely. Adrian's gaze narrowed slightly, the final piece settling into place. "You didn't run here to hide," he said. Ilara shook her head once. Slow. Controlled. And then. She said the one thing that changed everything. "I didn't run randomly," she whispered. Pause. The truth. A decision revealed. "I came looking for you." Silence did not feel the same anymore. Inside Adrian Voss's estate, silence had always meant control, perfect, unshaken, absolute. But now, standing just inches away from Ilara, that silence carried something unfamiliar. Something unstable. Something that did not belong to the king who ruled an empire built on certainty. "I came looking for you." Her words did not echo, but they stayed. Adrian did not respond immediately. His gaze remained locked on her, searching, calculating, dissecting every detail the way he always did. But this time logic did not align fast enough. Because nothing about her presence followed the rules he had built his life on. "You don't look for me," he said finally, his voice low, controlled. "You avoid me, if you want to live." Ilara's expression didn't change. "I wasn't trying to live," she replied softly. "I was trying to find the truth." The words settled heavily between them. Truth. The one thing Adrian had learned to bury deeper than anything else. His jaw tightened slightly, a subtle crack in the perfect structure of his composure. "Then start talking," he said. "Because right now all I see is risk." Ilara's fingers moved slowly toward her wrist, pulling back the damp fabric that had hidden it before. The mark was clearer now. Darker. Deliberate. Adrian had seen that symbol once before. Years ago. At the center of a war that reshaped the entire underground. A war he ended. Or believed he had. Her voice dropped, steady despite everything. "You didn't destroy them," she said. "You buried them." Adrian's gaze hardened instantly. "They were finished," he replied. "Every last one of them." Ilara shook her head slightly. "No," she whispered. "Not all." The room seemed to tighten around those words. Because if she was right, then everything Adrian had built since that war stood on a lie. "Who are you?" he asked again, but this time the question carried something deeper. Not authority. Urgency. Ilara met his eyes fully now. "My name is Ilara Quinn," she said. "But that's not the name they erased." Pause. A fracture. "My real name," she continued, her voice almost too calm for what it carried, "is Ilara Voss." The world didn't collapse. It shifted. Sharply. Violently. Adrian didn't move. Didn't speak. Didn't breathe. Because that name was impossible. He had no daughter. No bloodline left. Nothing that tied him to a past he had already burned to survive. And yet, the mark, the timing, the way she looked at him. Not with fear. Not with submission. But with something far more dangerous. Recognition. "You're lying," he said, but the certainty wasn't there. Not completely. Ilara stepped closer. Not enough to challenge him. But enough to remove distance. "I wish I was," she said quietly. Her breath remained steady, even as the weight of what she was saying filled the space between them. "My mother," she continued, "was part of that war. Not against you, but inside it." Adrian's eyes narrowed. "She was loyal," Ilara said. "Until she found out what was really happening." Loyalty. The foundation of everything he built. Now twisting into something else. "Betrayal," Adrian said coldly. Ilara shook her head again. "No," she corrected softly. "Truth." The word hit harder than anything else. Because Adrian knew one thing about truth. It was never simple. "She tried to expose it," Ilara continued. "That's why she died." A silence followed that felt heavier than anything spoken before. Adrian's mind moved quickly now, connecting pieces he had never allowed himself to revisit. The war. The disappearances. The alliances that shifted too perfectly. The men who stood beside him after it ended. Loyalty. Or the illusion of it. "And you?" Adrian asked. "Where do you fit into this?" Ilara's gaze didn't waver. "I'm what she left behind," she said. Pause. "The truth. And what they've been trying to erase ever since." Adrian's control didn't break. But it cracked. Because this was no longer just about a girl who walked into his world. This was about his past. His empire. His decisions. Everything he believed he had buried. "You carry proof," he said slowly. Ilara nodded. "Yes." Danger shifted again. Not outside. Inside. Because proof didn't just expose truth. It destroyed power. Adrian stepped closer now, his presence overwhelming, his voice dropping into a low, final whisper. "You understand what that makes you," he said. Ilara didn't hesitate. "A threat," she answered. Adrian's gaze darkened. Because she was right. She wasn't just part of the problem. She was the center of it. And now, he had only two choices. End it, or protect it. His voice came quiet, controlled, but heavier than anything before. "If I keep you alive," he said, "I risk everything." Elara didn't look away. And if you don't, she replied softly, you'll never know who betrayed you. Silence fell. Decisive. Because for the first time in years, Adrian Voss stood at a point where control alone could not decide the outcome. Destroy her. Or protect her at all costs. And either choice would start a war. War did not begin with chaos. It began with realization. Inside Adrian Voss's empire, silence fractured, not from outside pressure, but from something far more dangerous. Truth had entered the system, and truth did not move alone. It pulled everything hidden into the light, piece by piece, until nothing remained untouched. Adrian stood at the center of it. Not reacting. Not rushing. But deciding. If I keep you alive, I risk everything. The words still lingered between him and Elara, but now they carried weight beyond choice. Because the moment had already shifted. The war had already begun. Not in streets or open confrontation, but inside the structure he had built with absolute control. And that was where it was most dangerous. His comm device activated with a low signal. Sir, a voice came through, steady but strained. We've lost contact with 2 internal units. No response. No trace. Adrian's gaze didn't move. Locations? He asked. Inner network sectors. They were assigned to your direct security rotation. Pause. A pattern forming. Because those positions were not random. They were close. Too close. Betrayal was no longer a possibility. It was active. Elara stepped slightly forward, her presence no longer passive, no longer uncertain. Her eyes moved across the room, not searching, but calculating. She wasn't reacting to the situation. She was understanding it. They're not removing your power, she said quietly. They're replacing it. Adrian looked at her. And for the first time he didn't see weakness. He saw clarity. They've been inside longer than you think, she continued. Waiting. Building around your blind spots. His jaw tightened. Because that meant something he had never allowed. His empire had been compromised from within. The doors to the outer corridor opened, and 3 of his senior men entered quickly, their posture sharp, their expressions controlled, but not calm. Sir, we have movement across multiple sectors, one of them said. Internal. Coordinated. This isn't external pressure. Adrian didn't respond immediately. Because he already knew. This wasn't a fight against outsiders. This was a war inside his own structure. His empire against itself. His gaze shifted back to Elara. You brought this here, he said, his voice low, controlled. She didn't deny it. I exposed it, she corrected. A difference. A dangerous one. Because exposure meant truth. And truth destroyed control faster than anything else. Another signal came through, sharper this time. Sir, they've accessed internal routing systems. Someone with clearance. Clearance. Not just access. Authority. Adrian's expression darkened. Because there were only a few people in his empire with that level of reach. People he trusted. People who stood beside him through everything. Loyalty. Or the perfect illusion of it. Elara stepped closer now, not behind him, not waiting for direction, but beside him. Her presence shifted again, no longer something he was protecting alone. She was part of this. They're trying to isolate you, she said. Break your control from the center. Adrian's voice dropped into a quiet whisper. Then we remove the center they're targeting. Her eyes met his. And in that moment, something aligned. King and queen. Unspoken. But understood. Because this was no longer about survival. It was about control. Reclaimed. Elara moved first. Not physically. Strategically. Their pattern isn't random, she said. They're moving in cycles, cutting communication first, then structure, then authority. Adrian watched her closely. Because she wasn't guessing. She was reading it. Understanding it. As if she had seen it before. Or been part of it. They think you'll react the same way you always do, she continued. Control everything at once. Adrian's gaze sharpened. And I won't, he said. Power shifted. Not loudly. But decisively. Orders moved quickly now, his men responding with the same loyalty that had built his empire, but this time guided differently. Not by rigid control. By adaptation. By awareness. By something new. Because the system they were fighting knew his old patterns. But not this. Not her. Elara stood beside him, her presence steady, her breath calm despite the war unfolding around them. She was no longer the girl in the rain. She was something else now. She became powerful. Not through force. Through truth. Through clarity. Through the ability to see what others ignored. Adrian felt it. The shift. Not just in the situation. In her. And in himself. Because for the first time, he wasn't controlling everything alone. And that made him stronger. Not weaker. But as the system adjusted, as the internal war escalated silently through his empire, one final piece fell into place. One name. One position. One truth he could no longer ignore. Adrian's expression stilled completely. Not shock. Not anger. Something colder. More dangerous. Because he finally understood who had the access. Who had the authority. Who had been close enough this entire time to build a war inside his empire without being seen. And when he spoke, his voice carried no doubt. "No one moves," he said quietly. Silence answered. Because the final betrayal didn't come from an enemy. It came from the one man he had trusted the most. The war did not end with noise. It ended with truth standing where lies once ruled. Inside Adrian Vasa's empire, the final movement unfolded in silence. Not because there was no resistance left, but because resistance had lost its structure. What once operated in shadows, hidden behind loyalty and carefully built trust, now stood exposed. Every system that had been quietly manipulated, every path that had been redirected, every voice that had carried false allegiance, had been brought into the light. And in that light, control changed. Adrian stood at the center of it, his presence still, unshaken, but no longer defined by the same rigid certainty that once ruled him. The man who had built an empire on absolute authority now understood something deeper. Control alone was never enough. Truth decided what remained. Across from him, the final pieces of betrayal were no longer hidden. Not chaos. Not scattered threats. But a single, deliberate force that had been allowed to grow too close for too long. Someone who had stood beside him, advised him, shaped decisions with quiet precision. Loyalty turned into design. But this time it did not hold. Because Alara stood there. Not behind him. Beside him. The shift was complete. She was no longer the girl who collapsed in the rain. No longer the one running from something unseen. The fear that once followed her had transformed into something else entirely. Clarity. Strength. Power. She was not a victim. She became powerful. And that power did not come from force. It came from knowing. From seeing the patterns no one else could see. From understanding the truth others chose to ignore. The final confrontation did not need raised voices or visible violence. It needed recognition. The traitor's control did not collapse from attack, but from exposure. Systems that once responded silently now hesitated. Commands that once carried weight now fractured under doubt. Because once loyalty is questioned, it can never return the same. Adrian's voice carried across the room, low, controlled, final. It ends here. Not as a threat. As a decision. The structure of his empire shifted in that moment. Not breaking, but realigning. Those who remained did not stay out of fear alone. They stayed because they understood what had changed. Power was no longer blind. Control was no longer absolute. It was aware. And awareness made it stronger. Alara stepped forward slightly, her presence steady, her breath calm, her gaze clear. She did not need to prove anything anymore. She did not need to fight for space within the empire. She belonged. Not as something protected, but as something essential. A queen. Not crowned by title, but by transformation. Adrian turned toward her, his expression no longer just controlled, but measured with something deeper. Not trust. Not yet fully. But recognition. "You stay," he said quietly. The same words. But no longer a command. An offer. A position. A place beside him. Alara met his gaze, not hesitant, not uncertain. The decision had already been made long before she stepped into his world. "I was never leaving," she replied. And that was the truth. The empire did not fall. It evolved. New structures formed. Old blind spots removed. Loyalty was no longer assumed, it was tested, verified, understood. The war that had begun in silence ended the same way. But its impact remained. Stronger, sharper, unpredictable, and far more dangerous than before. Because now, the king did not rule alone. And the queen beside him saw everything. The night settled slowly around the estate, the storm outside finally fading into distant echoes. But inside, something new had taken its place. Not peace. Something more powerful than that. Balance. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Because some endings did not need words. They needed understanding. But as Alara's gaze drifted toward the far corridor, something shifted again. Not in the room. Not in the empire. Beyond it. A presence. Unseen. unfamiliar. Her expression changed slightly, her breath slowing, not from fear but from recognition of something unresolved. Adrian noticed instantly. "What is it?" he asked. Elara didn't answer immediately, because the truth forming in her mind was not simple. And not finished. "There's someone else," she said quietly. Pause. A warning. A future not yet written. "They weren't part of this war," she added. Adrian's eyes narrowed. "Then what are they?" Elara's gaze darkened slightly, her voice dropping into a soft, final whisper. "They're coming for the queen. And this time, the war would not begin in the shadows. It would begin with her." If this story pulled you in, if you felt that moment when a king chose truth over control, then stay with this journey till the very end, because this empire is only just beginning to reveal its secrets. And if stories like this, where power, loyalty, and truth collide, speak to you, make sure you're part of what comes next. But before you go, I want to ask you something. If you were in Adrian's place, and the one person who could expose your empire was also the only one you couldn't walk away from, would you protect her, or would you sacrifice everything to keep your truth buried?